Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jeff Wamble, and you are listening to the Blue Halo Podcast, a podcast where we discuss topics connecting law enforcement, the legal system, and just a dash of politics with the many aspects of the Bible. So there you go. Blue stands for law enforcement and Halo for religion. But you might be a little surprised at the connection these two worlds have with each other. And not only that, but our real life stories will be quite entertaining and they will be emotional at times. And they will be, okay? But the bottom line is they will make you think. That's one of our goals. It's human growth. Your eyes will be opened. You will be entertained. You will learn something about yourselves and other people. But most importantly, and I truly hope this, that you will grow in your relationship with God. That's a good thing, right? So get ready. This first episode is a doozy. In a few minutes, we will be discussing Emily's story.
What is the reason? The reason. What is the reason?
Thank you for joining me today on this Virgin Voyage. This is our first episode. I don't think you'll be disappointed. My name is Jeff Wamble, and I am a soon-to-be retired 30-year law enforcement veteran. And yes, that is a long time. It is longer than most law enforcement officers stay on the job, that's for sure. But I have experienced a lot, and sadly, I've seen quite a bit of tragedy, maybe more tragedy than the average human being should, but I don't regret it because it's in that tragedy. You know, those human experiences of suffering that we find God. This is how Blue Halo came together. I'm going to share many stories with you as this show progresses. I'm going to ask for your participation by sending in emails of experiences you've had. We'll even have a guest or two along the way. But first, before we begin, I must get some housekeeping items out of the way. This first one is very important. This episode, as will all episodes, starts with a prayer. Might be the same prayer, might change from time to time. I haven't decided yet. Many of you will know this prayer, though, so I encourage you to speak out loud wherever you are. But for those of you that may not know of it, here's how it works. I will say the words, God is good. And then you will say, all the time. And then I will say, all the time, and you will say, God is good. Pretty simple, right? It's easy, but I like it. Parts of society are lacking in a certain very important area, and that's God. I'll talk more on that later. The second housekeeping item is this. It's a disclaimer. We are going to be talking about something pretty heavy today, and also in future episodes. So here's the disclaimer. Let me read this to you. The Blue Halo Podcast discusses a variety of topics, including those of a serious nature. Segments of today's show may not be suitable for young children. Caution is advised. So there you go. We are going to be talking about a life and death issue today. But as with most things in our lives, God provides a silver lining. And I will share that with you in a moment. But first, let's pray. God is good. All the time. Good job, everyone. God is good all the time. So today's topic is about God's presence in tragedy. I call it finding the silver lining. And what I'm about to share with you is a police call that I was involved with that I can wholeheartedly say was the worst call I have ever been on. And it was and this may sound crazy, and it was the best call all at the same time. But before I begin, I want to let you know that I am changing many elements of the story. And I do this just basically to protect the identity of the people involved. You know, I want to be fair to them. The story is true, but some of the graphic details, and there will be some. I'm not going to candy coat things here, so they may not be suitable for listeners under 13 years of age, okay? I'm pushing that disclaimer again here because discretion is advised. And parents, this is an amazing story, but maybe you should listen to it first and then make the decision if your children should hear it. So let's begin. This is Emily's story. Now, to begin with, folks, I want to emphasize that laws have purposes. Okay, they truly do. You'd be foolish to think otherwise. And while some of these laws aim to prevent minor infractions, like, say, theft or vandalism, Others are designed to save lives. And when these laws are broken, tragedy almost always will follow. It's a fact of life. It's a truth of life. It's an unfortunate reality of life. So this was the case on January 18th, 1998. Now, typically a Sunday night in January for a third shift police officer will make for a very quiet tour, but there are some exceptions. On this night, it was 22:17 hours. That's military time. That was the time. That's actually 10:17 p.m. And I will never forget the time of this call. And I won't, because it had a very significant impact on my life, but not for the reasons you might be thinking. At the end of this episode, you'll understand what I mean. There's quite a twist to this story. Now, roll call had just ended, and several of my fellow police officers and I were waiting in line at the armory. I should tell you that normally the armory door would have been opened already with the sergeant inside, and he would normally be ready to issue our squad keys and other equipment. But this night was different. It was a little different. In fact, the sergeant was the last person to enter the armory. And the reason was he had just received a phone call from the dispatch center advising of an industrial accident that just occurred at a factory on our city's west end. And as it so happened, you could probably guess, my duty assignment this night was to ride the west end of town. So the sergeant says, "Jeff, get your keys, hit the road. Dispatch has a call waiting for you." And I replied, "Yes, sir." And I remember joking around by giving him a weak salute. You know, we all goof around that way. We're all peers. Real police work isn't like TV or the movies with all the formality towards each other. We're all peers, like I said, and it's pretty informal. So next, I cut to the front of the line to get my keys. Okay, it's informal, remember? When I did this, I was shoved playfully by other third shifters who were just screwing around with me, basically rubbing it in that I was the unlucky one to start my tour, my shift so abruptly. Nobody ever wants a call right out of the barn, including me. But I'll say this, to get even with those guys, I took the best squad available because I was the first person in line. And I did. I was selfish. I'll admit it. I took the best squad, and then I hit the road quickly, and I told dispatch I was in service and ready to take calls. Now, this is when things started heating up. Okay, it started heating up for me. I couldn't even place the radio microphone back on its stand before the big call came in to me. And this is somewhat how it happened, or this is somewhat how it sounded. The dispatcher said, "Unit 338. Now, that's my unit number. She was very professional, no emotion. She just said, "Unit 338. And I said, "338, go ahead." 338, respond to the Acme Widget Factory in reference to an industrial accident. A 7-year-old female is trapped in a machine on the south end of the building. Rescue personnel are on scene. And I say 338 copies. That's the gist of it right there. Now, as I hung up the microphone, my heart started racing. I remember this very clearly. This was not at all what I was expecting when the sergeant told me to hit the road. Okay, a bunch of thoughts ran through my head, but they all had to do with just one basic question, really. Why was a 7-year-old trapped in a machine inside a factory on a cold, wintry Sunday night in January? I didn't have to wait long to find out, though. Luckily for me, traffic was light and all the roads were recently salted, so it only took me a few minutes to get there, to the factory, that is. So I drove into the parking lot, and I remember dispatch advising me that the girl was at the southern end of the building. But here where I was on the scene, I saw an ambulance and a fire truck parked at the north entrance with their red lights still flashing at that time. And it turned out entry could not be made from the south. Truly, this doesn't really have much to do with this story. Anyway, I parked close to the north entrance, and I was careful not to block the path of the rescue vehicles. I figured they might be leaving before me. Then I rushed to enter the factory. Now, this is something very interesting. I don't know why I think of the crazy things I do at the strange times I think of them. Maybe you do this as well. Maybe you experience something like this. But going from the darkness of that parking lot on that cold January night to a brightly lit factory reminded me of the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy left the black and white world of her Kansas home, if you remember, and walks into the brightly colored world of Munchkin Land. It was like that for me. I don't know if you remember that scene. Why I thought of that particular scene at that particular time, I don't know. I'll never know. But I've had experiences like that before that and since then. And maybe we're all like that probably. But that one just stood out to me. And here's something else. Though the factory was bright and well lit, it was quiet. It was quiet. And I felt an eerie sensation immediately when I walked in there, even though it was bright. You would think it would be the opposite. But I mean, right away as I entered, I felt it. Something was missing. That's what it was. You all know how you get that feeling sometimes. Something wasn't right. And I knew what it was almost immediately. It was people. I didn't see anyone. There were no workers, no employees, no one. And it was all very quiet. And not one, here's the other thing. There was a lot of machines in this factory, but not one of those dozens of machines were running. But again, at that time, I'm thinking, where are the people? If the factory was open, where was everybody? Well, I would soon find out because there actually were people. First of all, let me tell you this. The factory was not open, at least not open for the usual business. And there were people, like I said, just not the people I expected. So what happened was, as I rounded a partial 15-foot wall to enter the factory floor, I could hear the faint sound of a woman crying. And as I continued to move forward, the sound of other men or other people whispering. But I couldn't see these people yet, not yet, because there were pieces of machinery in my way. But what I did is I quickly followed the sounds of their voices, and I came upon what I will share with you is one of the most horrific scenes of my entire law enforcement career. It was a scene that I can describe with only one single word, and I don't do this often. It was gruesome. The scene was gruesome, but I moved on. And as I approached, I discovered that what I thought were quiet sounds of a woman crying were not quiet sounds at all. They were now amplified because I was getting closer. They were much louder than before. And this poor distraught woman who was, I thought, crying, wasn't crying. It was a wail. She was wailing in anguish. She just had her heart broken, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. That's what it was. Her heart was broken, and you'll see why. So as I went toward the woman, maneuvering past drill presses and other machinery, I realized she wasn't alone. She was not alone. Merely 5 feet from her, just off to the side, the men, or more specifically the firefighters who were also dispatched to the scene, were very hard at work attempting to extract a young girl from a metal detection conveyor system. Okay, let me repeat that part. The firefighters were trying to extract this little girl, 7 years old is what she was, from a metal detection conveyor system. And more importantly, though, they were trying to save her life. So there I stood, somewhat paralyzed, as my tunnel vision focused on the little girl's limp and lifeless body. Now, if you would, picture in your head a young girl with beautiful golden blonde hair with blood in it. It was now blood-soaked and very disheveled. She had blue eyes, and they were open and bloodshot, and they were bulging from their sockets, folks. I can see all this in my mind's eye as I tell you. I can even see her nose, and this was strange. Her nose stood out to me, and it was because it was the only facial feature that she had that didn't seem to be affected by what she was going through being stuck in this machine. And it was a little nose. It was petite. And I even remember thinking back that this is the type of nose that someone would say, or where that phrase, cute as a button, comes from. And again, I don't know why, you think of the things we do at the times we do. I don't know. But her mouth was the part that really hurt me. It was her mouth that it just hit me. It was quiet now, but by the looks of it, I'm sure she was screaming in terror before going dormant. There was blood dripping from it because her insides were crushed and blood was coming out of her mouth. And I just can imagine what she was going through and what she was screaming as she was being crushed by this machine. And I'll explain that in a minute. Now, folks, I am trying to paint a picture for you here with my description. I'm trying to be detailed intentionally. Remember what I said at the beginning about laws having purposes? So there I stood. I said I had tunnel vision. I did. I was mesmerized for a few seconds by what I was looking at, but I was snapped back to reality very quickly when one of the firefighters barked an order at me to do something about the hysterical woman next to me, which turned out to be this girl's mother. And what was interesting about that time is, though I had tunnel vision, it affects your hearing as well. And I wasn't really listening to what that woman was screaming, the mother of this girl. I wasn't really listening to the words, but after I kind of came out of my trance, I could hear her say, "My daughter, that's my daughter." And she was repeating this over and over and over again. So I immediately go to her side. And at this point, I had sense enough to place her between me and the firefighters who were working on extracting her daughter from the machine, so she wouldn't have to look at the hideous scene basically that was taking place right in front of her. So she wouldn't have to see what her daughter was going through and the condition that she was in. So I said to her at this time, I said, "I'm sorry you're in such pain." And I lightly, just very lightly touched her forearm. And she pulled away. And I get that. She was lost. And she wrapped her arms around her own torso. To me, that looked like she was trying to find comfort. She was lost. But there was none. She couldn't comfort herself. Nothing was going to change what she just went through and what she just witnessed. And it would be a long time before she would feel any comfort. Now, I'm normally not a person to be at a loss for words or to offer my opinion on something, but I was at this time. I was at a loss. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do next. Do I hug this poor woman? Do I try to comfort her? Do I start the investigation? Do I just simply ask her what her needs are? All these thoughts went through my head within a couple of seconds. Well, what I decided to do is go with the first thing that came to my mind. And I asked her if there was someone I could call for her. So I asked that. I said, "Is there someone I could call for you? Maybe your husband?" That was the wrong thing to say. I should not have said the word husband. And she goes, "Ha!" And it jumped from her lips like it was an instinct. She said, "He's the reason this happened." And I'm like, "Your husband is the reason this happened?" I didn't say that out loud. It was in my head. But I said, "Your husband?" And she goes, "No, he's my ex-husband, but he's her father." Okay, now I was a little bit confused. How was the husband, and I should say the ex-husband, the father of this beautiful little girl, responsible for her gruesome death? Well, what I'm about to share with you is Judy's story of her daughter's death. And this was a story that took nearly 8 hours to retrieve while we were sitting in a hospital waiting room on this Sunday night into a Monday morning shift on January 18th, 1998. This story, that as it was told to me, mind you, was constantly interrupted by nurses and doctors and by Judy herself being so distraught and so emotionally heartbroken during the telling of it that she had to take several long breaks. But in the end, this woman was remarkable. Judy was. She was as brave a soul as I have ever encountered. Now, to begin, we have to go back several hours to about 1:30 p.m. on Sunday afternoon when Judy was getting ready to leave for her job as the custodian, mind you, of the Acme widget factory. That's why she was there. Her 7-year-old daughter, Emily, was sitting on the bed, watching her mother dress for work and had her overnight bag packed. She did this often. She was waiting for her father to pick her up so he could watch her for the night. You see, Judy and Frank is Emily's father, had divorced soon after Emily's second birthday. Judy had primary placement, but Frank, he would take Emily for overnight visits when Judy needed to work. Okay, this helped Judy make ends meet while providing some truly much needed father-daughter time. Okay, that's healthy for her. Now, Emily, as most, I would say, innocent young daughters who idolize their fathers would, look forward to these overnight visits. She liked them. And she had a different opinion of her father than Judy did as her husband. Emily was their only child, and Frank, he spoiled her whenever he could. which, and this was from Judy herself, according to Judy, meant whenever he had leftover money not spent on alcohol for himself. The relationship she had with Frank now, it worked for her though, because she needed someone to care for Emily. She needed someone to watch Emily when she worked the late shift. She didn't have anybody else. And she wouldn't dare leave her daughter home alone at night like she sometimes did, actually. She admitted this to doing during the daylight hours. She didn't like leaving her alone at all, but she was desperate, and her circumstances made it necessary. At least that's how she was justifying it to herself, and that's how she relayed it to me. And I understand. You see, she was basically alone with no friends, no family other than Frank to help her in a pinch. She was alone. And sadly, what happened in their relationship was Frank held the reins tight. And those are my words, which made it very difficult for Judy to make friends. That's what I took from her story. And he saw to it that her family relationships were all destroyed. So she was stuck. No friends, no family, nobody to help her out in a pinch other than Frank. So on this Sunday, Frank arrived on time, which was shocking when I tell you the rest. He arrived on time to retrieve Emily, but his condition was less than desirable. And that's putting it nicely compared to compared to Judy's description. The bottom line was he was drunk. Judy told me Frank was a heavy drinker, but was always sober around Emily. So she didn't think it was going to be a problem until this day. He shows up very intoxicated. So he either started early or was coming off an all-night bender. But either way, Judy wasn't letting her daughter leave with him. And she told him so, right to his face. But Frank wouldn't have it. How dare you speak to me like this? That was his reaction. Emily's my daughter. I will decide. You can just picture him puffing out his chest and trying to bully poor Judy. And that usually worked, to be honest. Judy would normally give in to Frank's demands. But this time she held her ground, and she refused to give even an inch, because this was her daughter's safety at stake, of course. Now, this argument was very heated, and it was vulgar, and it was loud, and it continued for several minutes, according to Judy. And then sadly, that argument turned physical when Frank had had enough, and he punched Judy in the mouth with a closed fist. And this wasn't the first time. That's what Judy was telling me. Not the first time Frank got physical with her, and she was ready. And that's important, an important part of the story. She was ready to be hit by him. So instead of absorbing the full impact of the blow when it came in, she said she was able to deflate much of it by leaning back quickly as it landed. Okay, so she fell backwards, but her lower lip was still cut. But the outcome could have been much worse had she absorbed the full blow. Usually what happens, according to Judy, is Frank would immediately apologize for striking her. But it was too late. The argument and the punch to her face was heard by Judy's neighbors, her next-door neighbors, who correctly, of course, called the police. And then within minutes, 2 police officers were at Judy's residence, and they placed Frank under arrest for domestic abuse. She was given a 72-hour restraining order against him, and then he was transported to jail. Now, this is another key piece. Judy, even though she was punched in the face, she declined to receive medical treatment. And this is important to the story. She said her wound, that injury to her face, was merely superficial, and she couldn't afford to lose her job. She needed to go to work. And the police had no reason to doubt her, but there was another concern that she had. It was Emily. Now, Judy was apprehensive to leave Emily home alone at night, especially after the violence she just witnessed. But she had no one to help her, remember? No one to turn to. Judy was desperate, and with no one to care for Emily and to help her out, and having the fear of losing her job dangling before her, Judy chose to bring Emily to work with her. She knew the factory would be closed, and basically her boss, he would be none the wiser. So in fact, Judy thought it might be fun to have her around, but she had no one to help, no one to turn to. Judy was desperate. So she brought her daughter to work with her. And she knew the factory would be closed. She knew She knew nobody would be around. Her boss wouldn't be there. So she would never be caught. And plus, she thought it might be fun to have her around. They could do the work together. So that's what she did. She brought Emily to the factory, and they began working. Everything went by pretty smoothly, according to Judy. Carpets were vacuumed, floors swept, items that needed dusting were dusted, the bathrooms were cleaned, and the garbage was gathered and placed by the North Service door. It was only a little after 9. That's what she told me. It was 9 p.m. when all the work was complete. They would actually get to leave early. Leave early to go home. There was just one last thing to do. Take out the garbage. Now, this is maybe one of the most important parts of the story. The dumpsters of this factory were located on the far end of the parking lot, and it would take several minutes to wheel all the cans and dump them in the dumpsters. It was cold outside, so Judy told Emily to stay inside the factory to keep warm while she loaded the flatbed cart and made her way to the garbage dumpster. Now, we all know kids are curious by nature, aren't we all? Well, Emily was no exception to this rule. So when Judy went away outside tending to the garbage, Emily began wandering around the factory floor, just wandering around. That is until she came upon a unique piece of equipment that looked like an albino elephant head. I know that sounds strange. And this albino elephant head piece of equipment had what looked like an ivory conveyor belt leading to its mouth. Now, to say this piece of equipment was interesting, okay, is an understatement. And I totally understand why Emily was intrigued. I totally understand why Emily was intrigued because I was too when I was on scene. As I alluded to earlier, we all have a fascination with things that are unfamiliar and unique. The elephant head conveyor system certainly fits that, don't you think? When Judy left the factory with the cart full of garbage, she was gone for nearly 5 minutes. A lot can happen in 5 minutes. Now, if Emily was anything like me, or maybe like you, she noticed the strange shape of the mainframe first, the part that looked like the head of an elephant. But then, I'm sure her attention was drawn to the white ivory-looking conveyor belt. But it wasn't really ivory, of course, but it was smooth. It had a shiny coating that led me to want to touch it, and I did. And I believe Emily touched it too. However, as I later learned from the evidence, when Emily touched it, the machine was fully operational and the conveyor belt was moving. At this point now in the story, you might be wondering what this machine was used for and why was it running with no employees around to watch it? As it turned out, the Acme Widget Company had assembled this machine for a candy manufacturer, and its sole purpose was to detect metal fragments in pieces of chocolate. You know, the type that come in assorted gift boxes during the Christmas and Valentine's Day seasons, those types. Now, though the factory was closed, this machine was left running, right? The idea was to see if the machine could stand operating for long periods of times, you know, like days and weeks on end. So it was unknown to Judy and Emily when they arrived at work that day that the machine had already been running for several days. And it was the only machine in the factory operating. Now, I don't know if it's irony, if that's even, I'll be honest, the right word to use, but in this case, it is truly tragic when a machine meant for good intentions, right? One meant to save lives by checking candy for metal fragments, has the script flipped and, you know, does a 180 and actually causes a death of someone, the death of little Emily. You see, once Emily discovered this unique piece of equipment, her curiosity probably overcame her and she touched the smooth ivory-looking conveyor belt like I did. But sadly and tragically, she was wearing loose-fitting clothing. She had a long-sleeve flannel shirt on that had buttons unfastened at the wrist, if you can picture that type of shirt. So as she ran her left hand over the belt, her shirt sleeve got caught in the exposed pulley system. Now, here's an important piece of information also. I keep saying that, I know, but there's a lot of little things that mean a lot in the outcome of what happened. It was almost like the perfect storm that created this mess for Emily. Normally, a protective casing would have been placed around the pulleys to prevent this type of tragedy. But this was a test run. Okay, they were testing this equipment out so that those normal safety precautions weren't being taken. So once Emily's shirt became entangled in the pulley mechanism, she was slowly, very slowly pulled toward the mouth of the machine. And I'm sure she struggled. You know, being pulled in like that had to be very strange. She was trying to free herself, but the grip of the machine, that grip that it had on the fabric on her shirt surrounding her wrist, I'm sure that made that impossible for her to escape. And I'm sure she was screaming too. She was probably yelling for her mother. But her mother, the only person that could help her at this time, was outside in the cold, hundreds of feet away, throwing the garbage away. When Judy eventually re-entered the factory after throwing away the garbage, she heard her daughter crying. And then she witnessed, when she found her, she witnessed what no mother, I'll tell you, should ever have to see. Judy ran to Emily as fast as she could, and the machine was already beginning to engulf her. And I'm going to be descriptive here, the way Judy described it to me. It first started at her fingers of her left hand. Then it went up her hand to her forearm, and her tiny bones were breaking. Then it got up to her shoulder. And Judy was panicking at this time. She was pulling at her daughter, trying to strip her away from the machine, from its death grip. That's the only way to describe it. The machine, when I saw it, it moved deliberately, and it was steady, and it was merciless, really, and unemotional. It's a machine. It was just doing its job. But Judy's attempts to free her daughter, they were just feeble. And though Judy was panicking, she had the wherewithal to try something else. So Judy left Emily's side again, and she ran to the opposite side of the factory to where she and Emily first entered, and then she quickly turned off the light switch. And here's why. This was her thinking. It was her contention that when she entered the building, she turned on the machine that was now consuming her daughter when she entered the factory to turn the lights on. She thought if she shut the lights off or flipped that switch again, that the machine would stop. So she did that. And when she did hit the light switch, she said, "Emily, stop crying." So she ran back to her daughter, but she found that she wasn't moving. The left half of her body was creviced between the machine's metal-framed mouth and the conveyor belt. And her head lay limp, just resting on her right shoulder. Judy said at that time that she didn't want to admit it, but Emily was dead. And I'm sure that force being just too great for her little body to withstand. It's a tragic story, folks. But here's a question. Could Emily have been saved? We may never know. From the evidence gathered at the scene, combined with Judy's statement, I believe Emily was the victim of a series of unfortunate incidents that led to her death. From her parents' divorce to her father's intoxication and his abusive behavior and the fact that he got arrested, to the violation of a number of OSHA rules by Judy, combined with the cold weather, to a curious machine running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that drew the attention of a young girl wearing loose-fitting clothing. All that is tragic. It was like the perfect storm for tragedy. But was it something else, folks? The death of a young girl in such a gruesome manner is definitely tragic. But in some strange way, was there a silver lining? Could a silver lining be found? I'm a believer in this stuff. I'm a believer in silver linings. I'm a believer in small miracles. So I think so. And I think you might too once you hear the rest of the story. If you remember, I began this story basically asking if something can be both good and bad, best and worst, if you will, at the same time. I said this was the worst police call and also the best. Well, how can that be? Emily had a painful death. And the situation seemed to be worse than first thought, at least for me and some of the nurses at the hospital. As Judy was finishing her story, just telling me all the details of what occurred at the factory that night, a nurse entered the waiting room and she asked to speak with me. And I could tell by her disposition, her news, it was going to be bad. It was not going to be good, that's for sure. So next I asked Judy if she would be okay if I left for a few minutes, and she nodded her head, letting me know it was good to leave, so I left. I barely shut the waiting room door behind me before this nurse pounced, right? She pounced on me, and she seemed very upset. She was emotional, and she said, "You're not going to believe this." And then she led me down the hall towards an exam room. And I tried to ask what happened, but all she did was hold the door open to Emily's exam room. And there was a second nurse in there already when I entered. And that nurse said, "We think she was sexually assaulted." She just blurted it out. Now, I was extremely tired at this point, and I thought, was my mind playing tricks on me? Did I hear this right? Sexually assaulted? And I said, "Are you sure?" The nurse said, "Look." That's what the second nurse said. And she lifted the blanket so I could see Emily's torso. Now, I've seen a lot of bad in my day, but this blew my mind. So now, on top of everything else this poor girl had been through, to be sexually assaulted, she was raped, was just plain evil. Now, I hesitated. I didn't want to look, but I had to. And I had to look because what I was being shown and this information I was being given was potentially evidence of a crime. Of course it was, if she was sexually assaulted. So I just stood there. I was quiet. I was trying to think. I seemed like I was there for an hour, but it was only a few seconds. What do I do now? That's what I thought. Now, do I have a different conversation with Judy? Was it Frank? Was it somebody else? So, of course, a million thoughts are going through my mind. But it was all for nothing. Thank God. As soon as the doctor came in to examine Emily, he put our fears of a sexual assault to rest. So the reality was, those newfound injuries that Emily had, those injuries that led the nurse to believe she was sexually assaulted, was from the strength of the metal detection machine. It was so strong and so powerful that it had the ability to crush bone, and in doing so, crushed the left side of Emily's rib cage, forcing her body to contort and move in such a way that the nurses thought she may have been sexually assaulted. This was information I hoped Judy would never hear. She didn't need to hear this. For me, I was grateful to the doctor. After hearing that explanation, I felt relieved, in part for Emily, partly for Judy, and selfishly, I'll be honest, and I'll admit this, for myself, not to have to investigate and live the emotional roller coaster that comes along with some sexual assault cases, especially when it's a child. But that didn't last long. Not at all. That relief was short-lived. And as it turned out, the doctor was just as happy to see me as I was him. Here's what he said to me. He said, "Officer Jeff," that's what he called me. He said, "We have an interesting situation before us." And I had no idea what he was talking about, so I just nodded. And he says, "You may not believe this, but Emily's organs, some of her internal organs are still intact and can be used for transplants." I'm like, amazing. I didn't expect this. He said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Would you please ask her mother for permission for us to operate?" Now let that sink in for a minute, if you would, okay? Let that sink in. For me, that was a fast kick to the gut that I didn't see coming. All I could think of was me. My heart started racing so fast. Oh my God. Are you saying you want me to ask the mother of a 7-year-old girl, whom she just witnessed die in a most excruciating way, if we can dissect her body? This is all in my head. I'm like, you're kidding, right? I didn't say that out loud. You know what I said? I simply said, okay, and I left it at that. Well, that wasn't quite good enough for the doctor. As I turned to leave the exam room, he had one last comment for me. He said, "Time is of the essence." I knew that, actually. Of course, we have to move quickly. So Judy was still where I left her, sitting by herself in the waiting room. She had a used tissue in one hand, and the other one was perched under her nose. She barely looked at me when I entered. She was still just lost in herself. And I asked her how she was doing. I asked if I could get her something, maybe some water, and she said, no, I'm fine. And she lied, of course. Now, have you ever had one of those moments? A moment of what I call dreadful anticipation? It's a moment where you realize your next sentence could be life-altering. I've had a couple in my day. Well, this was one of mine, and it was terrifying. But I began. It was more, at this point, it was way more than my job. It was a calling. Judy, I told her, I have to ask you a question. And that's how I started it. And her eyes moved my way just a little bit, but her head remained stoic. She didn't want to move. But I told her, I said, Judy, the doctor told me that some of Emily's organs are in good shape. They're in good condition. He wants to operate. He thinks he can transplant these organs, but he needs your permission. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I said it. There. It's out there. And I'll be honest, it wasn't my most eloquent moment, but I got it out there for her to hear. And next, the most astonishing thing happened. The thing that made me want to tell you this story. The thing that taught me to look at life from a positive glass half full standpoint. It's the thing that made me tell my children and anyone else that will listen, including you, to look for the small miracles in life because they're everywhere. And sometimes they're not so small. So Judy, after being asked the most difficult question of her life, a request I'm sure no parent ever expects to hear, she released a flood of tears and just stared. She stared into what I call the emptiness of what was now her world. But without skipping a beat and allowing herself only enough time to gulp in a quick breath, she answered me in a single word. She said, yes, 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 she would allow other children to be saved by her daughter's tragedy. She then closed her eyes and she sighed in a way that led me to believe she had found some peace. Now, Emily's story runs the gambit of life's themes. It has love, betrayal, grace, isolation, motherhood. There's poverty. And then the big one, of course, is death. And it provided, for me anyway, a roller coaster of emotions. I can't imagine what Judy was going through inside. Emily's story is by far, it's not even close, the best and worst police call I have ever been a part of. That gruesome scene that I described for you of Emily trapped and crushed in that machine, that metal detection machine, that lives in my memories. It does. But what overrides that tragedy for me is the small miracle. I don't know how small it actually is the miracle. That silver lining that I talked about. And that silver lining of Judy's courage to remain righteous and allow several other children to have their lives saved using that tragedy of Emily's death. I can honestly say, and I'm honored to say, that Judy is one of my heroes. I pray for her often, and I hope you will do the same. Please do. Now, Emily's story was both tragic and I hope to you inspiring. And it shows how God can take something evil that exists in our world. Because remember, we all have free will. We can all choose. We have that freedom to choose between good and evil. Evil is allowed in our world, but evil will not win. We already know that. We know the outcome. God wins. Good prevails over evil. So God, in all his glory, takes what we see as evil and turns it into good, a miracle, a silver lining, something positive. And when we see this, these miracles, the silver linings, the light bulb goes on in our heads and we get it, right? We get it. I call these eureka moments. It's better than finding gold. But will there be pain? Yeah, of course. A lot. We're told this in the Bible, aren't we? We're going to have pain, but we have to have faith. We have to take heart and have faith in God, folks, right? And that, my friends, will help us heal. It will help us grow. I want to share something else that's very positive. After this incident, the tragedy of what Emily went through, her story, the tragedy of witnessing what I just described for you, Something I would never wish on an enemy, by the way, seeing a dead child in such a way. But to this day, I can honestly say that I have never, not once, had one bad dream, not one nightmare, nothing because of this incident. Am I some super cop? No, hardly. But I'll say this. Some police officers would have nightmares. Some officers, especially a few decades ago, might turn to substance abuse like alcohol, drugs, maybe depression and suicide. I didn't go that direction. Again, I'm no super cop, but I am a man with faith that God knows best and he opens doors for us. And because of that faith, regarding incidents like this, I choose to have a glass half full attitude. So folks, here's the next piece of the puzzle surrounding Emily's story, at least for me. A door opened. A very large door, actually. About 10 years after that dreadful call, I was assigned to our police department's crime prevention unit. This is a community policing type unit. One of the duties as a crime prevention officer is to teach a short class on suicide prevention during a CIT course. CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Training, and this training is special and relatively new to law enforcement. And it's designed, the CIT training is designed to specifically educate law enforcement on mental illness and how mental illness not only affects only the person who is living with it, but also people who live with someone who is living with mental illness. Okay, did you follow that? It's a great program because it allows officers, police officers, to recognize someone living with mental illness and respond accordingly, which is great for everyone's safety. So I've been teaching these classes for over 10 years, and I have been able to use Emily's story. I share the story with the class, and I do this to illustrate several points and to provide life lessons that we can all learn from. And I share these points with other people. Because when you think about it, Emily's story is more than a story about Judy's strength and how several other children were saved from one child's tragedy. Although to me, that's maybe the most amazing thing that came from it. But when I break this down, there are many other lessons to be learned, like why we have laws and why we have rules. Why overuse of substances like alcohol is a bad thing. In this story, Emily's father was intoxicated. That's what she told us. He broke the law. He battered Judy. Now, Judy herself, though somewhat understandable, violated many OSHA rules, didn't she? What about the factory and their safety precautions of leaving a powerful running machine unattended and without safety guards? So you see, there's a lot we can learn. And we have to. We must. Because if we don't, Emily died for nothing. But that's not what happened. So why have I not had one nightmare or bad dream? Because this story has many positive attributes. This story, with all its life lessons, has been heard by over 300 law enforcement officers. It's been heard by over 800 adults who are in some way a supplement partner, so to speak, to law enforcement. And it has also been heard by nearly 200 high school seniors. And more importantly, at least three other children in need of life-saving organs receive them. I choose to look at this call in a positive manner. I choose to have faith. Thanks for listening today, folks. And remember, look for the silver lining in any tragedy and find the small miracles in your life. They're everywhere. And please share your stories with me. What are your eureka moments? Send me an email. I want to hear from you. Our email here is bluehalopodcast@gmail.com. That's BLUE, like the color, HALO, podcast@gmail.com. Until next time, keep the faith and pray for one another.
When I close my eyes, I hear your voice whispering. Only they knew. Your love's the reason. That's the reason. Love is